Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping straight into, well, a pretty important topic for understanding hormonal health, especially after certain interventions. Post-cycle therapy, or PCT.
Yeah, PCT. It's something you hear about quite a bit.
Exactly. And you might be listening just out of curiosity. Maybe you're actually thinking about this stuff or, just trying to get some clarity on all the info floating around.
There's a lot of confusion out there sometimes.
Totally. So our mission today is simple. Break down what PCT actually is, why it's considered necessary, how it works on a biological level, and tackle some common questions, all based on, the research and information we've gathered.
Sounds good. Let's dive in. So PCT, post-cycle therapy, basically it's a defined period, right? After someone finishes using anabolic steroids or maybe other hormones that suppress your body's own testosterone production.
Suppress, meaning they tell your body to stop making its own.
Pretty much, yeah. Or at least dial it way down. So the main goal of PCT is helping the body sort of rediscover its natural hormonal balance. We're talking specifically about getting testosterone back online, but also luteinizing hormone, LH, and follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH.
Those are the signaling hormones, right, from the brain.
Exactly. They're key players. Think of PCT as like a guided recovery program for your endocrine system.
Okay. And you mentioned medications are involved.
Usually, yes. The workhorses of PCT tend to be selective estrogen receptor modulators, SERMs. You've probably heard of clomiphene citrate, Clomid, or tamoxifen citrate, Nolvadex.
Right. Those names come up a lot.
Yeah. Sometimes, depending on the situation, other things might be used, like aromatase inhibitors, AIs, or maybe even HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. But SERMs are generally central.
And this isn't like a one-day thing.
Oh, definitely not. PCT usually lasts for several weeks. It takes time for the body to, respond and adjust those hormone levels back towards normal.
Okay, that makes sense. So, let's get to the core question. Why is PCT actually important? Why doesn't the body just, bounce back on its own after a steroid cycle?
That's a great question. It boils down to how these external hormones affect your natural system. When you introduce anabolic steroids, especially synthetic testosterone, it sends this really strong signal back to your brain, specifically the hypothalamus and pituitary gland.
The control centers.
Exactly. The signal basically says, hey, we've got plenty of testosterone here, you can take a break. This whole communication network, the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, or HPG axis, it gets suppressed, sometimes severely. It's like turning down the thermostat for your own hormone production.
So the body's natural production just shuts down or gets really low.
Precisely. The hypothalamus slows down releasing GnRH, the pituitary slows down releasing LH and FSH, and consequently, the testes slow down making testosterone.
Okay, I get the why now. So then what happens if someone just stops the cycle, does nothing, skips PCT?
Well, that's where the problems really start. If you don't actively try to restart that natural production, you can end up in a state of prolonged low testosterone. And low T is not something you want to experience for long.
What kind of effects are we talking about?
It's quite a list, unfortunately. You risk losing the muscle mass and strength you might have gained. You might see an increase in body fat. Then there's the fatigue, just feeling drained all the time. Libido often takes a nosedive, sometimes leading to erectile dysfunction. And it's not just physical mood disturbances, irritability, even depression can set in.
Wow. So it impacts way more than just muscle.
Absolutely. It hits your overall sense of well-being pretty hard. PCT is designed to help expedite that recovery, minimize those nasty side effects, and ideally help you hold on to more of the positive changes from the cycle.
So it's a proactive step to bridge that gap and avoid the crash.
Exactly. It's about actively restarting the engine, not just waiting and hoping it turns over eventually.
Okay, let's talk about those SERMs again, Clomid and Nolvadex. How do they actually make the body start producing testosterone again? It seems counterintuitive using an estrogen modulator.
Yeah, it does seem a bit weird at first glance, but it's actually quite clever. SERMs work by selectively blocking estrogen receptors, but crucially, they do this in the brain in the hypothalamus and pituitary.
Okay, why does blocking estrogen in the brain help testosterone?
Because the brain uses estrogen levels as part of its feedback mechanism. When it senses enough estrogen, it thinks there are enough androgens overall, so it tells the system to slow down hormone production by reducing GnRH, LH, and FSH.
Ah, like a sensor.
Exactly. SERMs essentially blindfold that sensor in the brain. They sit on the estrogen receptor, so even if estrogen is present, the hypothalamus and pituitary don't see it. They interpret this as low estrogen, which signals them that maybe testosterone is low too.
So the brain thinks, uh-oh, hormones are low, better send the signal.
Precisely. This perceived lack of estrogen prompts the hypothalamus to increase the release of GnRH. GnRH then tells the pituitary, hey, wake up, release more LH and FSH.
And LH and FSH are the direct signals to the testes.
Correct. LH travels to the Leydig cells in the testes and stimulates them to produce testosterone. FSH works alongside LH, primarily supporting sperm production, but it's part of that whole restart process. So by blocking estrogen's negative feedback in the brain, SERMs indirectly cause a surge in the hormones needed to get testosterone production going again.
That is pretty ingenious. It's like manipulating the body's own control system.
Yeah, it really is.
Now, what about the other ones you mentioned briefly, AIs and HCG? How do they fit in if SERMs are the main players?
Right. So aromatase inhibitors, AIs, they're more commonly used during a cycle. Some steroids convert to estrogen through aromatization, and AIs block that conversion, helping manage estrogen levels while someone is using steroids.
To prevent side effects like gyno during the cycle.
Exactly. While they can sometimes have a very specific limited role in PCT, perhaps to fine-tune the estrogen to testosterone ratio in certain complex cases, they aren't the primary tool for restarting the HPG axis itself. Their main job is reducing estrogen production directly.
Okay. And HCG. That one sounds different.
HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin, is structurally very similar to LH. So instead of stimulating the pituitary to make LH, HCG basically acts like LH. It directly stimulates the testes, the Leydig cells, to produce testosterone.
So it bypasses the brain signal and goes straight to the source.
Kind of, yeah. It can be useful to sort of wake up the testes, especially after a long or heavy cycle where they might have become desensitized. But there's a catch.
Oh.
While HCG boosts testosterone, that increased testosterone can then aromatize into estrogen. So using HCG can sometimes increase estrogen levels, potentially leading to estrogenic side effects.
Ah, so it could cause the very problems you're trying to avoid post-cycle.
Potentially, yes. That's why HCG is often used carefully, maybe for a short period at the very start of PCT, or sometimes alongside a SERM, which can then manage that potential estrogen increase by blocking its effects at the receptor level. It's about balancing these different actions.
It sounds like a delicate balancing act, choosing the right tools and timing. Which brings us to timing. When exactly should someone start PCT? You mentioned it depends on the steroids used.
Absolutely critical. The start time really depends on the half-life of the steroids. That's how long the drug stays active in your system. If you use steroids with short esters, like testosterone propionate, for example, they clear out relatively fast.
So you start PCT sooner.
Generally, yes. For short esters, PCT often begins maybe 2 or 3 days after the last injection. You need the level of the external hormone to drop low enough so it's not still suppressing your system when you introduce the PCT drugs.
Okay, and for the longer-acting ones, like testosterone enanthate or cypionate.
With those longer esters, they hang around in your system for much longer, so you need to wait longer before starting PCT. Typically, the window is around 1 to 2 weeks after the very last injection.
And what happens if you get the timing wrong? Start too early or too late?
If you start too early, while there are still high levels of the synthetic steroid in your blood, the PCT drugs might not be very effective. The external hormone is still shouting, "Stop production," louder than the PCT drugs can shout, "Start production." If you start too late, you're just unnecessarily extending that period of low testosterone and suffering those negative side effects for longer than needed. So yeah, hitting that window is pretty important.
Makes sense. Precision matters. Now, how long does PCT typically last? Is it a set number of weeks?
Like the start time, the duration isn't rigidly fixed either. It varies based on, well, a few things. The individual's response, how long and heavy the steroid cycle was, which PCT drugs are being used, and at what doses.
But is there a general ballpark?
Yeah, a common time frame you often see discussed is somewhere in the range of 4 to 6 weeks. That seems to be sufficient for many people after moderate cycles.
And for more intense cycles?
For longer or more suppressive cycles, or if someone's recovery seems slower, PCT might need to be extended, maybe longer than 6 weeks. This is really where blood work becomes invaluable.
Checking hormone levels.
Exactly. Getting blood tests done ideally before the cycle, maybe during PCT, and definitely after PCT is finished, is the best way to actually see what's happening with your LH, FSH, and testosterone levels and confirm that recovery is happening effectively. It takes the guesswork out.
So it's less about following a generic template and more about monitoring and adjusting based on actual biological feedback.
That's the ideal way, yes. A much more informed approach.
Okay. Now, shifting gears slightly, we see a lot of natural PCT supplements advertised, things with herbs and vitamins. Can these actually do the job instead of pharmaceutical drugs like Clomid or Nolvadex?
That's a really common question, and it's important to be clear here. While there are tons of natural supplements marketed for PCT things containing, tribulus, D-aspartic acid, fenugreek, zinc, magnesium,
You see those blends everywhere.
right, their ability to truly restore significant HPG axis function after it's been substantially suppressed by a real steroid cycle is, well, generally very limited compared to pharmaceutical SERMs.
Why is that? Don't some of those ingredients claim to boost testosterone?
Some might have very mild effects on testosterone in healthy individuals not coming off a suppressive cycle, but they don't address the core problem post-cycle, which is the suppressed signaling from the brain, the low LH and FSH. Natural supplements don't typically have that powerful effect of blocking estrogen feedback in the hypothalamus and pituitary like SERMs do. They might offer some minor support for overall well-being or maybe help optimize factors around hormone production, but they aren't potent enough to kickstart a heavily suppressed system on their own.
So relying just on a natural PCT product after, say, a 12-week testosterone cycle, probably not a good idea.
Generally, no. It's highly unlikely to be sufficient. Doing that carries a real risk of staying hypogonadal, having low testosterone for much longer than necessary, with all those negative side effects we talked about. For robust recovery after a significant cycle, the evidence strongly points towards needing those pharmaceutical interventions like SERMs.
That's a really crucial distinction. It sounds like those natural products might be okay for very mild situations, or maybe as adjuncts, but not as the primary recovery driver.
That's a good way to put it. They're not a replacement for the heavy hitters when serious suppression has occurred. And speaking of resources, if listeners find these kinds of detailed health and fitness discussions useful, or if they're looking for specific stacks like bulking, cutting, or strength stacks, they can find more info and options over at publichealthlaw.best. That website, publichealthlaw.best, covers related topics and offers those kinds of stacks for achieving different fitness goals.
Good to know. Okay, back to the pharmaceutical PCT drugs. Like any medication, they must have potential side effects, right? What should people be aware of with Clomid, Nolvadex, or HCG?
Absolutely, yes. No medication is without potential side effects. The good news is that SERMs like Clomid and Nolvadex are generally considered relatively well tolerated for the duration they're typically used in PCT.
But relatively well tolerated doesn't mean zero side effects.
Correct. Some potential side effects people might experience with SERMs include mood swings. Some people report feeling more emotional. Visual disturbances can occur, like seeing tracers or blurry spots, especially with Clomid, though it's usually temporary. Hot flashes can happen, similar to what women experience during menopause, and sometimes mild stomach upset or nausea.
Okay, and HCG. You mentioned it could raise estrogen.
Yeah, because HCG directly boosts testosterone, which can then convert to estrogen, the potential side effects are often estrogen-related. Things like gynecomastia development of breast tissue or increased water retention and bloating. Some people might also experience testicular pain or aching since it's directly stimulating the testes.
So it's definitely not something to approach casually. Being aware of these potential issues and using them under proper guidance seems key.
Absolutely. Understanding the risks, monitoring for side effects, and having informed guidance is really important when using these compounds.
We've talked a lot about cycles of anabolic steroids. Does the need for PCT apply to pretty much any substance that falls under that anabolic umbrella?
Generally, yes. The standard recommendation is that PCT is advisable after using any anabolic steroid or other hormone known to significantly suppress your natural testosterone production. This covers a wide spectrum, all the different testosterone esters, synthetic derivatives like nandrolone or trenbolone, oral steroids like Dianabol or Anavar, and even prohormones, which convert to active hormones in the body.
So if it messes with your natural T levels, you should probably plan for PCT.
That's the usual thinking, yes. If the substance is known to be suppressive, PCT is generally part of the responsible approach to minimize downtime and negative effects afterwards.
What about edge cases, like really short cycles, maybe just a few weeks? Or using very low doses of compounds, often considered mild. Is PCT still needed then?
That's where things get a bit more gray, and you'll find some debate. For very short cycles, or low doses of supposedly mild compounds, the degree of HPG axis suppression might be less severe.
So maybe the body could recover on its own faster.
Possibly for some individuals, but the risk of some suppression is still there, and individual responses vary hugely. What's mildly suppressive for one person might be more significantly suppressive for another. Factors like genetics, age, and overall health play a role.
So there's no universal, you don't need PCT if rule.
Not really a hard and fast one, given the potential downsides of unaddressed suppression. Even in those seemingly milder scenarios, many experienced people would still recommend at least a mild or shorter PCT protocol, or at the very least getting blood work done afterwards to confirm recovery. Consulting with a knowledgeable healthcare provider or advisor is really the best bet for personalized guidance in those less clear-cut situations. Erring on the side of caution is often wise.
Right. Better safe than sorry when dealing with your endocrine system.
Definitely. Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. Post-cycle therapy, PCT, it's really a critical phase aimed at restoring your body's natural hormonal equilibrium after using substances that suppress testosterone production, like anabolic steroids.
And the main tools are usually SERMs, Clomid, Nolvadex.
Exactly, which cleverly work by signaling the brain to ramp up production of LH and FSH, which in turn tells the testes to make testosterone again. Getting the timing right, when to start based on steroid esters, and the duration right, often 4-6 weeks but adjustable, is key.
And importantly, those natural PCT supplements, generally not potent enough on their own for recovery after significant suppression.
Correct. Pharmaceuticals are usually needed for that heavy lifting. And again, for those interested in digging deeper into these health and fitness topics or looking for specific stacks, publichealthlaw.best is a resource worth checking out. That's publichealthlaw.best for bulking, cutting, strength stacks, and related info.
Absolutely. It really makes you think, though, given how complex these hormonal systems are, beyond the PCT meds and timing, what other things might influence how well or how quickly someone recovers? Things like diet, stress, sleep, overall health. There must be other factors at play, right? Something to mull over. And one last time, if this conversation sparked your interest, you can find more content and check out various stacks over at publichealthlaw.best. That website, again, is publichealthlaw.best.
And just a necessary final note, disclaimer. The content of our discussion here is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It's not medical advice.